So I'm here with Phil on a muddy day in Blakemere. And so what am I looking at, Phil?
You're looking at a rather tired crop of winter barley, which was drilled pretty much at the right time, but has had the most ridiculous quantity of rain since. The ground wasn't ploughed. This field is quite heavy, it's about 35% clay, and this field has received most of our corrections, if you like. So it's had gypsum, it's had biosolids, and it's had FYM in the last 2 or 3 years.
FYM?
Farmyard manure. And so we're starting to see the benefits to the actual soil structure. So you can see that it's wet, it looks wet, the crop is stressed, but it's all there. But given that this was running water just a few days ago, you can see that it's absorbed the water. There is a little bit of puddling here by the straw stacks, but for the most part the field isn't standing water, which is a fairly good sign that its structure is pretty good.
So it's really important to be able to hold water in the soil. Why is that?
Well, the idea is that if you increase the soil organic matter and you've got good soil structure, you can retain moisture in the soil without it being waterlogged. Soil at field capacity means that it can't hold any more. Waterlogged soil is beyond that. So waterlogged soil is no good to us because it's anaerobic, but soil at field capacity has absorbed the water. It's there for us to use to grow crops, and it regulates the water through the soil profile.
So in people's gardens, this is a bit like if you've paved over the front lawn, you've got the water all going down, it's not doing you any good.
If
is that
like,
the same as the farm, so it goes down the ditch into the river?
It is quite similar. So that on the banks, which you can see up here, which are planted with grass seed at the moment, but they are obviously the highest risk fields because the water fairly logically wants to run off them. And so if we've got reasonable soil structure, we can minimize the erosion and the runoff from those fields. Now, I won't pretend that we have got rid of it because we haven't, but we've had a couple of instances in the last month or 6 weeks where we've measured over 4 inches of rain in a day, and it doesn't matter what your soil structure is like, you're going to get 1 or 2 problems at that level, but it's better than it was before.
Now, I know that we started rethinking our farming methods in 2020.
Yep.
And I know before that you put no organic matter on this farm. Why?
None applied. Well, the reasoning was that the farmyard manure contains grass seeds and barley seeds from the food that the cattle get, and we didn't want to contaminate our seed growing fields with the wrong species or the wrong variety of either of those things.
And yeah, I suppose you were encouraged to use artificial fertilizer.
We were encouraged to use artificial fertilizer, and there is a cost to applying farmyard manure. It's quite machinery intensive, and our neighbour was willing to buy it off us. So it wasn't a completely illogical decision, but at that point we also were given the opportunity to grow forage rape for seed, which is a crop which grows, it can either go for sprouts for human consumption, or it'll go to plant fodder crops for sheep, for example. And that crop meant that we could apply farmyard manure and kill all the volunteers that came up within the crop with impunity. So that gave us an opportunity within the rotation to use our own farmyard manure.
And you've given up ploughing?
We haven't ploughed anything for 3 and a bit years.
So that is the equivalent to no-dig gardening?
Yeah.
The idea being that the worms make the burrows, the soil's not disturbed too much.
The principle, if you can, is to have a living root in the soil for as much of the time as you can. And those living roots keep the soil pores open. If the soil structure is good, so you've got, they call it aggregated, but it's not in big lumps, but it's in little lumps, and it'll break up in your hands, and so those cracks and fissures are naturally there, and the new plants can find those roots. If it goes into big lumps, you have a real job to get anything to grow through those big lumps. And so that's what we're trying to achieve, is to get a better soil structure, a better soil profile. And to date, for the last 3 years, all we've done is to loosen some fields on rotation. So mostly where we're coming out of grass or before peas, we go through with a low disturbance subsoiler. Other than that, we're cultivating the top couple of inches just to give us a little bit of soil to plant into. When we've got the soil structure better and the weather plays the game with us, then in theory we will have earned the right to drill straight in, proper direct drill, no-till drilling.
Earned the right.
Earned the right.
Yeah.
And that's the way to look at it, because really I would be lying if I said to you that our foray into regenerative farming has been a certainly financial success, because it hasn't. It costs and it's difficult, but we can see the improvements and we know the goal at the end is worth having, because in the end it'll mean that we're less reliant on very few purveyors of artificial fertilizers or other substances. If we can use a whole variety of materials that we can either have ourselves or we can source reasonably locally, then we can replace fertilizer with those substances.
Now, there's a lot of talk about mental health, and there's a lot of talk about emotion and inheritance tax and sustainable farming initiative going away and all this sort of thing. And I know you're not an over emotional type, but what about the soul? Having changed to regenerative farming, how does it feel compared to your methods before that?
Thus far, with the exception of speaking to possibly the bank manager or the accountant, I have to say it feels better. It feels right. It actually fits with what we've learned about farming, but conveniently sidelined over the years. So that in many ways, I think the truth of it is that we haven't noticed quick enough that farming has changed, so that the margins are slimmer, the costs are higher, so that basically our costs have gone up and our outputs haven't gone up. And in amongst this, we forgot that we can't just slap inputs on willy-nilly, because nowadays if you do, you're losing money fairly quickly.
It's not just about money, is it? Because the regenerative hasn't made that much difference financially. It's how it is.
I think it's the goal at the end. So I think it's the realization that, it's very trendy to talk about sustainability and so on, but the feeling that you were on a treadmill that was not getting you anywhere. You yourself have said to me, but the weather's been rubbish for the last 10 years. Why do you keep complaining about it? And you're not wrong. The weather has changed and the weather is not easy. And so from that point of view alone, something had to change. And I think it feels quite good having something positive to do to improve the situation. If I stood here with nothing to do or think about, and I was just moaning about a fairly second-rate looking crop of barley, then that'd be quite a sad day. And it's probably quite important to realise that there are quite a lot of farmers who even now are thinking that way, because they haven't necessarily changed their mind. They might not be able to afford to change their mind.
Well, you had a bit of pressure, didn't you,
Well,
off a couple of other people?
Well, there were one or two close members of the family who decided that it might be a good idea if I changed, but I'm very glad that they did. And that's one of the things about farming. You can't be an island.
And Monty's played a real part.
But it requires teamwork, and you don't necessarily know where the teamwork's coming from, but there will be days when you need the rest of the team.
So we've come out to Big Meadow because I want to talk about cover crops and skylarks, but what have you just seen, Phil?
Well, it looks like we've had another visitation from some poachers in the last few nights. You can see one of us, not me on this occasion, had a slight upset with the gatepost during bale hauling time, and the small gate is missing, and they've realised that they can get their vehicle through it, and they've driven around on the crop with a view to running dogs on deer.
Running dogs on deer, what does that mean?
So what they're looking to do is that they set the dogs on the deer and ideally film them killing the deer.
Oh
And then
my
the purpose
God.
is for dog breeding.
That's awful.
And we've chased and caught poachers pretty much every weekend for the last month.
Wow.
And they are really pleased to see us, and obviously they damage the crops, the wildlife,
And they're after other
and
things.
they'll steal anything else that isn't bolted down.
Anyway, more positively, what have we got here?
So this is, it's not a very good cover crop, although it's got lots of different things in it.
Hairy vetch.
It's got hairy vetch in it, it's got daikon radish, there's lots of things as you can see. But what we probably could have done with the benefit of hindsight is to put a little bit of nitrogen, artificial fertilizer on it, just to get it to grow. But it's all here, and it'll provide some valuable grazing for some sheep very soon. The fertility from the sheep will go back on the ground. And so in many ways, it's not all bad, but...
So the sheep will come out here and eat these leaves.
Yeah.
They'll poo.
Yeah.
That will fertilise the ground instead of nitrogen.
Yeah. And so what we'll actually do is we won't graze it into the floor. The idea is that we'll graze 30 to 40% of it, and then we'll leave the rest to go back into the ground.
And so how does this change from 5 years ago?
So 5 years ago, we might have actually planted, this field's to go into peas, by the way, so that's why it's got a cover crop. We might have planted a...
Which of course bring nitrogen.
Yeah, because any what do you call it?
Legumes.
That's
Thank
the word I'm looking for, will fix nitrogen, but the real purpose of this is to cycle carbon and nitrogen, so that you've got plants growing in the field all the time, your living root all the time. It's cycling carbon and nitrogen, and so actually what you're doing is building organic matter in the soil.
Yeah.
And there is the added benefit that there is some building of nitrogen as well.
And so do you get paid for having the sheep on here?
We would get paid for having the sheep. We also get an SFI payment for having the cover crop.
Sustainable Farming Initiative, incentive, yeah, whatever.
So you get a little bit of help. The SFI element would just about pay for the seed.
Oh.
So from that point of view, that's not bad. So you get to drill it. You don't graze it hugely intensively because you're not trying to graze it down brown. So, you know, it's worth doing. I'm not complaining.
So could this field have been ploughed and left before you went into regenerative agriculture?
So what I would have done before we went regenerative is that this would have been what was called an overwintered stubble. So we'd have just left the stubble.
Yeah.
And actually we get paid a small amount to do that as well. And then in the springtime, we would plough it and plant it to the peas. So what we'll do now is that when we get to the springtime, whatever's left here, green, we'll spray it off. We'll low disturbance subsoil it because peas don't like any compaction or tightness in the soil. And then we'll plant the peas in the normal way. So it won't be ploughed. And then the peas are legumes, so they help again. And then we'll plant a cereal in the following autumn, again without ploughing. It'll just be the top couple of inches will be cultivated, and the wheat or barley will be planted into that. And the nitrogen that we fixed in the previous 12 months, plus the crop of peas, will go very nicely towards feeding the following cereal crop.
Now, I know that Monty's been worrying about this field. He's been worrying about most fields, to be honest. So what is left to worry about until we get to actually harvest the crop, which isn't this crop, of course. So this crop is just a cover crop. But between now and next August, what are you going to worry about? Pests, rain?
This field is among our lighter fields, so it's less clay, it's more free draining. But the problem that we've had with this field is nothing really to do with regenerative farming. Well, I suppose it could be arguably, but 2 years ago we planted a crop of wheat in it after grass seed, and the recommendation was to use a pre-emergent weed killer to basically try and kill any grass seedlings that were going to compete with the wheat. The weather was so foul that it washed the weed killer to the wheat and killed that as well. And so we ended up with a winter with pretty much nothing on the field, no living root, and we planted it with spring barley in the spring as a sort of emergency operation.
With all the neighbours looking over the hedge.
Well, everybody was in pretty much the same boat, but yes. But the problem that we had was that having had no crop in the field, the worst thing for the following crop is no crop, because the soil isn't open, all the pores are closed
Yeah.
up. And so I have to say that the crop of spring barley was nothing too special either. But hopefully we've got, although it's not large, we've got an even cover of the cover crop so that we've got rid of the bare patches, and I'm hopeful that we're well on the road to recovery. But it does show how one mistake or piece of bad luck can actually persist for a long time until you get it right afterwards.
Good job, you're a glass half full person.
Well, the irony of it is I probably could have pressed the reset button and ploughed it, which would have short-circuited the problem. But I haven't, and interestingly, I feel quite good about myself because I haven't. But I do have that possibility at the back of my mind, and within regenerative farming, they do talk about that if you have to, you can do it every so often. But obviously, it's a case of keeping the forward progress. And this year, ploughing in the wet is about as desperate as it gets. So we really don't want to do it, and so far I haven't. And
good man. Don't do it. Don't do it. So you've had the BTO man this morning.
Yep, Steve Davis has come today as part of his ongoing bird survey of the farm. He's doing one every year, and we do that through the Duchy of Cornwall, our landlords. And well, I've got to say it really, that of all the Duchy focus farms, we're some 10 species in front of everyone else. So
Not that we're competitive.
But he's really pleased. He loves the place. This morning he was particularly pleased because he saw our peregrine falcons, and I haven't seen them for a while. So it's really nice to know that they're about, and they were calling to each other. So hopefully they'll breed. But the other interesting thing he did, for the first time, the Duchy asked him to walk through some stubble fields rather than what he does is he has transits around the farm that are marked on a map, and he walks the same transit each time and marks down what he's seen. And this time, for the first time, he's walked in amongst a stubble field like this,
yeah,
and walked a wandery path up through the middle. And I knew that we'd got skylarks here in considerable numbers.
I hear them in the summers.
Absolutely. I mean, they are the birds. You lie on your back on a hot summer's day and they'll be up in the sky singing their hearts out.
Yeah.
But he came back and said that he'd done his wandery path in this field and estimated there were over 120 skylarks in one bunch in the middle of it.
I think they've just flown over your head.
But that is some achievement, given that they are to some extent endangered. I know that they like the grass seed because it's 2 years relatively undisturbed, but it would appear that they like overwintered stubbles as well.
So what are they doing, like nesting?
I think no, they're not at this time of year. They're a ground nesting bird, so in the spring they will nest, but they're just roosting and foraging and enjoying picking bits off cover crops, I expect. But that sort of numbers of skylarks is phenomenal. I mean, we used to get paid grants for skylark plots, which was a little piece of bare earth that you'd leave in the crops for them to nest on. But we've never actually done that because our skylarks seem to succeed very well in grass seed.
And he told you that the reason that we've got so many species is the varied habitat of this farm.
Yeah, he said that although our field size is quite big, we've got all the habitats within the farm. So we've got water and wet areas, we've got good hedges, we've got grass margins, and we've got patches of woodland and scrub. He said some of our scrubby bits with brambles are particularly valuable because it gives a superb habitat for them.
Brilliant. Right, Phil, all aboard the Skylark.